These heads represent the last 6 to 7 years of production of the Ping line, including the G5 and the G10. The G5, G10, and the Raptor have the same hosel configuration as this G2. Let's now look at plugs. Billy Bob's has made a patented part for all the different designs of the Ping Club head. First, the i3 fairway wood and the i3 Tech take our plug, which allows you to put a 335 shaft into it. Our feeling is that a 335 shaft is better than a 350 shaft, which is the standard shaft Ping uses throughout their entire line. Please note Billy Bob's patented ribs on the plug will allow you to sand them down or change their configuration, which allows you to change the loft or lie of the club. Next, we have the first i3 stainless steel driver Ping came out with, which also has a plug configuration that is skinny, elongated, and square in the back. This plug also has our patented ribs. We also have the ISI stainless, and it has the original Ping plug. Now we move to the ISI Tech. This plug also features Billy Bob's patented rib design, which allows for better adhesion as well as loft and lie adjustment. The ISI Tech and the i3 take the same plug. Ping designed these clubs to use a plug with an offset, and Billy Bob's only supplies a plug made for right-handed configuration. If you need a left-hand offset, you need to send the club back to Ping, or you could insert the plug, but the offset would be on the opposite side. With these two clubs, Ping has incorporated larger receiver grooves that need to be adjusted for proper fit. All of the rest of the Ping line are all center-lined or right or left-handed. The ISIs and the i3 are the only ones that are only right-handed. The Ping G5 has a deep receiver groove, and we make a ferrule for that as well, which allows it to center the shaft. Now, let's look at how to disassemble a Ping. We are going to take a shaft off a Ping G2 fairway wood and pull out the Ping factory plug. First, insert it into the extractor and tighten the jaws. Place it in the large turret, which allows you to pull the club out very easily. Then, using a heat gun, heat the head. The plug doesn't require much heat because it's made out of PVC and comes out very easily. After you've applied heat with a heat gun, bring up the puller and it will pull it right out with no problem. Next, clean out the head using a wire brush to get the epoxy out of it. Let's also take a look at how to remove the factory plug from a Ping ISI. Place it in the extractor and tighten the jaws. Use a heat gun to heat it. Remember to heat the bottom, due to the fact that epoxy tends to collect in the bottom during manufacturing. Then, bring up the puller and with a gloved hand, as the head will be hot, remove the head easily from the shaft. Now, if the shaft comes out but the plug is still in, just grab the plug with a pair of pliers and pull out the plug. The end results are the same, except the heat released the bond between the shaft and the plug, instead of the bond between the plug and the head. After removing the head and ferrule from the shaft, you need to clean all the old epoxy off the shaft. Using a 1x42 microbelt for microbelt sander, you can sand off all the epoxy from the shaft without damaging the fibers in a graphite shaft. First, turn on the sander, and using easy pressure, turn the shaft against the belt with one hand while holding it with the other. All of the epoxy is removed and the shaft is now prepped. Be sure not to touch the prepped part with your hand, as the oils from your hand can degrade the epoxy when you build the club. To prep a new shaft, you need to have at least 1 inch to 1.5 inches of paint removal. Using a 1x42 microbelt from a microbelt sander, you can remove the paint. First, turn on the sander, and using easy pressure, turn the shaft against the belt with one hand while holding it with the other. If you push too hard or use too much pressure, you can damage the shaft or remove too much paint. To clean the heads, fill the cavities with acetone. Let the head sit for approximately 10 minutes, so the acetone can start to dissolve the epoxy residue in the head. It is important to make sure the receiver holes are clean of the old epoxy so you can get good adhesion and so the plug fits properly. After about 10 minutes, dump out the acetone and take a wire brush and go in around the sides to release any of the residual epoxy. Then, take an awl or small flathead screwdriver and scrape the walls and the bottom to get any epoxy cleaned out. Be careful that you don't slip and scratch the finish. Then, take an air hose and clean it out. Take another look inside to see if there's any more epoxy to remove. Once it's relatively cleaned, it's prepped to assemble. Next, let's reassemble the G2 fairway wood. This is the plug, and it has a special angle at the bottom. This is different from the ISI and ISI 3 fairway wood plug. It does have Billy Bob's patented ribs, so you can alter the loft and lie of the club by sanding the ribs if you'd like. Insert the plug and notice the top line is a little bit above it, which is good. When you glue it in, you will tap it on a hard surface and get it to sit down a little further in the receiver head. However, you don't want it to sit too high because that means there is still epoxy residue that needs to be cleaned out. After the G2 dries, abrade the inside with a wire brush, then put in the epoxy. Coat the tip of the shaft and insert it. Clean off the residual epoxy. To clean the ISI, dump out the acetone. Using a wire brush, clean the inside of the receiver hole. Then, use an awl or flathead screwdriver to clean it out some more. Finally, use an air hose to ensure it's relatively clean. Now it's time to insert the plug into the ISI. The top line is a little higher, which is okay. Now prepare the epoxy. After mixing the epoxy thoroughly, get an ample amount of epoxy on the plug and in the hosel. Get a good adhesion between the plug and the head. Then, press it down so the top line goes all the way down. Clean off any excess epoxy. After you've allowed the epoxy to dry, there should be good adhesion between the plug and the head. To insert the shaft, mix some more epoxy. We're going to insert a 335 shaft. If you would like, you can remount the hosel to a 350. If you want to put a factory shaft back in, just use a 350 fluted reamer. We've abraded the tip with the sander, and we need to also abrade the hosel as it is smooth inside. For good adhesion for the plug and shaft, it needs a rough surface. Using a wire brush in the hosel, abrade the inside. Then, fill it with epoxy and coat the end of the shaft with epoxy. Insert the shaft into the head. Clean off any excess epoxy using alcohol and a paper towel. Get it nice and clean because once the epoxy dries, it is very difficult to remove. And now you have a nice finished club. This is the G5 head, which is very popular. The G10 and the Raptor are also popular. Billy Bob's makes a ferrule adapter which has patented perforated edges for epoxy adhesion. It fits in the receiving groove of the head. Today, we are going to use the 335 adapter, but Billy Bob's also has the 350 adapter if you want to use a 350 factory shaft. Remember, this ferrule adapter can be used with the G5, the G10, and the Raptor. The ferrule adapter fits into the hosel nicely. There's a perforated collar that goes into the head, fills the receiver groove, and protects the shaft from breaking. It also adds feel to the club. To assemble, first mix up the epoxy. Put a little epoxy on the shaft. Then, put the adapter on the shaft and push it down. Get enough glue on the hosel and then insert the shaft with the adapter into the head. Push the shaft on the floor to ensure you get it all the way into the head. Then, using a paper towel and alcohol, clean off any residual epoxy. And there you have a nice fit. Finish this club by turning down the ferrule and polishing with acetone.